glacier wind bit through my worn windbreaker, temperatures dipping to minus 20 degrees Celsius at 4,000 meters above sea level. I'd spent 4 straight hours hacking solid ice apart with a steel ice pick to clear a collapsed ice fissure, my left ring finger crushed under jagged ice slabs mid-operation. The flesh split open, frostbite mixed with oozing pus blackening the skin, all the way to the second knuckle. A team of resort staff stood 10 meters back, surrounding Su Nianru. She'd only twisted her ankle slipping on a small patch of ice, yet Pei Jianchuan had chartered 10 full helicopters, flown 3 specialist doctors up the mountain, and arranged a private heated lounge just to tend her minor injury. The team had hired me as their emergency lead guide, agreeing to pay 10,000 RMB one-time hazard pay once the dangerous path was cleared. When I finished the work and dragged myself over to collect the cash, Pei Jianchuan blocked my path, his tall frame rigid, eyes bloodshot staring at my mangled hand. "Would you rather cripple your own hand entirely than come beg me for help?" His voice cracked over the howling wind, fingers locking tight around my wrist hard enough to bruise my skin. "Lin Jianchuan, how long are you going to keep throwing a fit over trivial fights?" I twisted my arm free without a single flinch of pain, staring flat back at him. The word tantrum he spat out dragged 3 years of buried agony straight to the surface. 3 years ago, I'd knelt on the marble floor of his private study for 3 consecutive days, begging him to spare money for our premature son's critical heart surgery, sending 17 unanswered calls to his phone every hour of every night. Every single ring was erased by Su Nianru before Pei could see it, and the final call I got through was answered by her soft, dismissive tone telling me to wait until the next day, while Pei lay asleep in their shared suite that night, unaware his infant son was fading fast in a county hospital incubator. By the time the child flatlined, I couldn't even scrape together enough cash for a basic wooden cremation box. "Throw a fit." A hollow, dry laugh escaped my throat, carried off by the glacier gale. "I'm just here to collect the 10,000 hazard wage you agreed on for the ice fissure rescue. Cash or bank transfer." Pei's jaw locked tight, veins bulging on his neck. He reached into his tailored cashmere coat, pulling out a black leather checkbook from the inner pocket. "I'll write you $1 million. No strings attached. Take it and quit this deadly guide work immediately." I shook my head once, no hesitation in my tone. I'd spent 2 years hauling heavy climbing gear across lethal ice terrain. Every cent of my guide wages poured into repeated pediatric ICU fees for my son, only to watch Sue's behind-the-scenes interference stall the final life-saving operation. That $1 million he waved around like pocket change would have saved my child's life 3 years ago. Back when I knelt and begged, he turned a blind eye entirely. "I don't want handouts from you. I only take payment I've earned with my own labor." My gaze drifted past his shoulder to Sue, who leaned wrapped in expensive cashmere blankets supported by 2 female assistants, her bandaged ankle barely even swollen beneath thin gauze. 10 helicopters, round-the-clock medical staff, luxury thermal blankets for a minor sprain. Meanwhile, my 3-month-old boy lay locked in a cold mortuary freezer, stuck in limbo because I couldn't cover storage and cremation fees. Pei's expression shifted from furious frustration to confused shock, unable to process the stark contrast I laid bare without a single shout or sob. He'd spent 3 years fully isolated from every detail of my suffering, fed a carefully curated narrative by Sue that I'd fabricated a non-existent baby as a financial extortion scheme. He called his assistant over via radio, barking orders to bring 10,000 yuan in physical cash immediately. The subordinate sprinted up the icy slope 10 minutes later, clutching a sealed thick paper envelope stuffed with banknotes. I counted every stack one by one in front of them, sliding the envelope securely into the inner pocket of my frayed jacket. No word of thanks left my mouth. I turned and began walking back toward the glacier camp without glancing backward once. Pei called my name loud enough to cut through the wind, chasing after me at a sprint, his leather boots slipping on frozen stone slabs as he closed the distance to grab my elbow again. "Your hand's frostbite is going to lead to full amputation if you don't get treated within 48 hours. His grip loosened the second he spotted the black, oozing wound on my ring finger, genuine panic flickering across his arrogant, controlled features for the first time since we separated 3 years prior. "When did you injure yourself like this?" "None of your business." I pulled my arm free a second time, keeping my gait steady over uneven ice. I knew every loose rock, every hidden ice crevice on this mountain range better than any resort staff or hired climbing expert. 3 years of daily high-risk routes had carved every hazard into my muscle memory. I'd memorized every inch of this frozen wasteland the same way I'd memorized every painful detail of my son's short, sickly life. Pasted frozen in place as I walked away, staring after my lone figure cutting through sheets of blowing snow. Sue hobbled over a minute later, supported by her 2 aides, laying a gentle hand on his arm and murmuring soft comfort about how stubborn I was being. He shrugged her touch off roughly, his gaze still fixed on the path I'd vanished down the glacier trail. I trekked 4 hours down the mountain's winding stone roads once I left the high-altitude ice field, arriving at the small-town funeral parlor as dusk settled over the valley. The storage room administrator Old Chen unlocked the cold storage cabinet for me without needing to ask who I'd come to see. He'd watched me trudge up and down this mountain every single month for the past 90 days, scraping together small batches of guide pay to extend the mortuary storage fees for my son. I pulled the envelope of 10,000 cash out of my pocket, counting out the exact amounts for 3 extra days of freezer storage, cremation furnace fees, and a cheap white casket with a cracked lid I'd spotted at the funeral supply shop that morning. The leftover cash would cover my camp dorm food costs for the next 2 months, enough to avoid borrowing money from anyone again. I pulled open the metal mortuary door slowly, staring at my son's tiny pale frame swaddled in an old cotton sweater I'd stitched together from my own worn winter clothes. A frayed cloth doll embroidered with a character, Pei, rested tucked in his curled palm. He clung to it through every fever spike, repeating that he was waiting for his father to come visit. I knelt beside the cold metal cabinet, brushing a strand of fine black hair off his forehead with my uninjured right hand, my frostbitten left hanging limp at my side. No tears spilled down my cheeks anymore. I'd exhausted all my grief 3 years prior, trapped in a cycle of helpless begging that yielded nothing but cold silence and Sue's mocking dismissal. When I finished sitting with my son and locked the mortuary cabinet shut again, I headed back to the guide camp's shared staff dormitory well after midnight. A brand new high-end professional mountaineering parka lay folded neatly across my bunk, price tag still partially stuck to the inner lining. This was the exact coat I'd stared at in a luxury mall boutique during our first year of marriage, back when Pei had been on a business call and brushed off my quiet longing with a dismissive, "Buy it if you want, I don't care about trivial clothing costs." At the time I'd hesitated and put the garment back on the rack, unwilling to spend his money without feeling guilty for being a burden. Now the expensive outerwear was left anonymously on my bed, a transparent half-hearted attempt at making amends from Pei. I folded it tightly and stuffed it into the deepest corner of my luggage bag, never planning to wear it. Comfortable warm coats meant nothing when the person who needed warmth the most was already gone forever. The next morning, I went to the camp office to collect my weekly route assignment slip, only to find the manager Lou, handing me a revised roster shifting all my high-pay dangerous A-line ice fisher routes to low-altitude beginner trails with a measly 2,000 yuan per trip wage. He admitted a high-level private request had come through overnight ordering my hazardous work routes reassigned for my own safety. I knew instantly the order had originated from Pei. I don't want the low-risk beginner trails. Keep me on A-line glacier paths with 10,000 yuan hazard pay each trip, I told Lou flat, sliding the altered roster back across his desk. Lou's face twisted with unease, rubbing his palms together nervously. The client who put in the request has full sponsorship power over our entire camp's operating budget. I can't override their instructions without risking all our staff's jobs. I nodded in understanding, turning to walk out of the office without arguing further. If Pei intended to strip my only steady high-income work stream as a form of quiet coercion, I had an alternative lined up already. A private glacial geological survey team hiring independent guides for an 8,000 yuan single trip, no safety guarantees or corporate oversight, all risk fully signed off and a legal liability waiver before departure. The job paid slightly less than my usual ice rescue work, but still enough to cover all cremation costs without compromise. I tracked down the survey team's contact number via the camp's public bulletin board, calling to confirm I'd take the next day's deep glacier expedition assignment regardless of my injured finger state. That evening, as I packed my climbing harness and ice axe for the survey mission, my dorm room phone buzzed nonstop with incoming calls from Pei's personal cell line. I muted the device entirely, tossing it into my travel bag and ignoring every notification alert. He thought he could manipulate my livelihood by pulling financial strings at the guide camp to force me into reaching out and begging for his support, just like I'd begged 3 years ago for our son's medical care. This time I had zero intention of giving him the satisfaction of a single desperate plea or emotional breakdown. The following afternoon, as I trekked deep into uncharted West Glacier terrain, leading the geological survey crew, my walkie-talkie crackled to life with Lou Da's urgent voice. He relayed a frantic message from Pei's assistant, demanding I abandon the hazardous survey route immediately and return to camp for a private meeting with the tycoon. I pressed the talk button once, my tone steady and unyielding. I've signed a full liability waiver for this expedition, and I will finish the full route before returning to the camp. Any requests from Pei Jianchuan can wait until I've completed the contracted guide work. I cut the transmission and powered the radio off completely, focusing my full attention on testing thin ice layers ahead of the survey team's footsteps with my damaged left hand. Every sharp twinge of frostbite pain shooting up my arm only reminded me of why I'd never rely on Pei's wealth or mercy again. Behind me, the entire crew watched my stiff, unflinching posture as I forged ahead through the glacier's deadly maze of hidden cracks, fully aware I had no one left to fall back on besides myself. Far down the mountain, Pei sat in his black luxury SUV, gripping his phone uselessly as the radio signal went dead, realizing his attempts to control my life and force a conversation had completely failed. I returned to the staff dorm after finishing the full West Glacier survey route at dusk. My left ring finger throbbed nonstop through the entire descent. The cracked frostbite wound had split open again after gripping the ice probe for hours, fresh blood seeping through the bandages I'd wrapped around it that morning. As I pushed open the dormitory door, a woman sat cross-legged on my threadbare camp bunk, designer down coat, and custom leather boots starkly out of place amid cheap canvas climbing gear scattered across the floor. It was Sue Nianru, her makeup perfectly polished even in the frigid mountain climate, a cold, calculating smirk tugging at her lips the second our eyes locked. I set my ice axe and climbing pack down beside the doorway without acknowledging her presence, moving straight to the sink to rinse the blood off my injured hand. Sue stood up and trailed after me, heels clicking sharply against the thin metal floor tiles. "Took you long enough to get back," she drawled, tone dripping with deliberate condescension. "I've been waiting over 2 hours for you to finish that meaningless mountain labor." I kept my gaze fixed on the running tap, scrubbing dried ice and congealed blood off my knuckles. No response offered. She hated being ignored. That much was obvious from the way her jaw tightened instantly. She stepped closer, pulling a bank check out of her luxury handbag and slapping it down on the narrow metal vanity beside the sink. The printed figure on the slip hit 1 million RMB bold across the top line. "Take this money and leave the mountain permanently tonight," she ordered flatly. "Book a flight far away from the city, cut off all contact with Pei, and forget that kid ever existed. If you refuse, I'll make sure every glacier guide camp within 1,000 kilometers blacklists your name. You'll never find another high-risk, high-pay job to scrape by on." I dried my hands on a frayed cotton towel, glancing down at the check without reaching out to touch it. 3 years prior, I'd begged Pei for enough cash to cover my infant son's heart surgery, and Sue had intercepted every single chance I had to speak to him directly. Now she waved a $1,000,000 slip at me like it was pocket change, acting as if a pile of money could erase the fact my 3-month-old child died alone in a cold medical ward because of her meddling. You think cash fixes everything? I asked her quietly, no volume raised, no anger bleeding into my voice. Back when my son needed emergency ICU care, I couldn't scrape together $5,000 for the deposit. You had full access to Pei's phone and all his funds, and you chose to block every path I had to reach him. That kid's life can't be bought back with a $1,000,000 check. Sue's fake gentle smile vanished in an instant, her true vicious temper breaking through the polished social mask she wore around Pei. She leaned forward, fingers curled tight at her sides, eyes blazing with unmasked panic beneath her well-done eyeshadow. I didn't do anything to hurt that child. You're just clinging to a dead baby to leech Pei's wealth, and I won't let you ruin everything I've built over these past 3 years. I tilted my head slightly, studying her flustered facial expressions. Her panic told me she'd already caught wind of Pei digging into old medical records and communication logs, terrified the full scope of her sabotage would surface at any moment. Ruin what you built. I repeated her words slowly. You built your life on a stack of forged documents and deleted phone records. You hid my child's existence from Pei, tampered with hospital scheduling to delay critical surgery, and erased every emergency message I sent him the night my son's heart failed. Those aren't mistakes. Calculated choices you made to lock me out of Pei's world for good. Sue took a sharp step forward, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face, voice sharp enough to echo off the thin dorm walls. Keep spreading these baseless rumors, and I'll make your life impossible here. Every town clinic, every mountain lodge will turn you away. You'll end up with nothing, stuck wandering these snow peaks with a broken hand and no income to feed yourself. I folded my arms across my chest, the injured left hand tucked safely against my torso to avoid knocking against anything. Her threats held little weight. I'd already lined up multiple independent geological survey teams that didn't rely on the camp's corporate sponsorship budget, Pei controlled. Even if every official guide route got locked off to me, remote glacier sampling expeditions would still offer hazard pay enough to survive on and continue visiting my son's ashes at the town temple. Go ahead and pull whatever strings you want, I told her plainly. This mountain range has dozens of unregulated exploration crews that don't answer to your or Pei's corporate funds. You can't cut off every single source of work for me. Sue's confidence crumbled further at my unshaken calm. She'd come fully prepared to threaten my livelihood, expecting me to break down into begging the second she mentioned losing work and income. Instead, I stood entirely unafraid of her hollow power plays. She fumbled for more threats, grasping at whatever leverage she thought she could wield against me. Even if you keep working these dangerous jobs, how long can you hold out with a permanently disabled hand? You'll be useless on the ice soon enough, and you'll have no choice but to cave and take my hush money. I lifted my bandaged left hand slightly to show her the blackened, oozing frostbite wound peeking out from under gauze. This hand's damage started 3 years ago, when I spent 20 hours straight carrying my feverish baby back and forth between clinics trying to find a hospital that would admit him. Back then, you blocked every medical avenue available to us. This injury's just the latest consequence of the choices you made, not some bargaining chip you can use to scare me off. Sue fell silent for several long seconds, unable to fire back with another hollow intimidation tactic. She'd come into my dorm fully convinced fear would drive me to flee the mountain immediately, but every single threat she tossed out bounced off without landing a single blow. She grabbed the check off the vanity and crumpled it tight in her palm, shoving it back into her designer purse with a harsh rustling sound. You'll regret refusing this chance to walk away peacefully, she spat out, spinning on her heel and storming toward the dorm exit. The metal door slammed shut hard enough to rattle the thin wooden bunk frames lining the room. Once her footsteps faded down the corridor, I sank onto the edge of my bed, staring at the empty vanity where she'd laid the $1,000,000 check moments prior. Her panic confirmed Pei was closing in on the truth about all her hidden schemes, and she'd rushed here in a desperate last-ditch attempt to silence me before everything unraveled for good. I pulled out my old cheap smartphone and sent a short text to Luda, asking him to forward any visitor records or security camera footage of Sue entering the dorm building that evening, tangible witness evidence I could hold on to if she continued escalating her harassment against me later. 2 days passed before a knock sounded at my dorm door again. This time it wasn't Sue, but Pei's retired personal assistant, Old Shin. He carried a thick sealed manila folder tucked under one arm, his shoulders weighed down with obvious hesitation as he stepped inside once I gestured him in to sit. He didn't waste time beating around the bush the second he sat down on the bunk opposite mine, sliding the stack of printed records across the metal table separating us. I spent weeks digging through archived office equipment logs and carrier communication records Pei kept locked in his corporate vault, he explained in a quiet, weary tone. All the evidence is here in full chronological order, every detail of what Sue concealed from him 3 years ago. I pulled the folder closer and flipped through the printed documents one page at a time. Screenshots of all 17 emergency calls I dialed Pei the night our son's condition spiraled downward, each marked as manually deleted from his mobile device by Sue's fingerprint access logs, scanned copies of the forged paternity test paperwork Sue had submitted to Pei's legal team, complete with the lab's official statement discrediting the falsified report, a fully authenticated copy of the fake. Attorney's letter Sue had drafted using a counterfeit company seal sent to every pediatric hospital in the city to bar our child from receiving treatment under Pei's name. Old Chen's voice dropped even softer as he watched me scan each damning piece of proof laid out before my eyes. 3 years ago, the night your son was rushed to emergency care, Pei was locked in his private study going over quarterly investment reports the entire evening. Sue took his phone into the master bedroom without his knowledge, erased every incoming alert from your number, and personally picked up your final desperate call to brush you off until the next day. He never caught wind of any of your attempts to reach him until I dug up archived carrier data last month on his orders. My fingers hovered over the printed call logs, a cold, hollow sensation spreading through my chest rather than the explosive rage I'd anticipated. For 3 full years, I'd carried the belief that Pei had deliberately ignored my cries for help, choosing Sue's company over his dying infant son, but the full timeline laid out on paper rewrote every painful memory I'd clung to. He hadn't turned his back on us by choice. Sue had constructed an airtight wall of deception to cut all lines of communication completely between father and child. Old Chen leaned forward slightly, gaze heavy with guilt. I stayed silent all these years out of fear Sue would retaliate against my family if I exposed her manipulation back then. But once Pei started asking questions about the old paternity file, I couldn't keep hiding the full truth any longer. All of this material is legally admissible if you choose to file a civil suit against her for medical sabotage and fraud. I closed the folder and set it aside on the tabletop, processing the flood of new information washing over me. The hatred I'd nurtured toward Pei for 3 long years suddenly felt misplaced, built entirely on the false narrative Sue had manufactured and locked him inside of. His ignorance wasn't indifference. It was the product of calculated, elaborate deception spanning months on end. Does Pei know you brought this evidence to me? I asked the retired assistant calmly. Old Chen shook his head. I haven't told him I came up the mountain to deliver these records. I thought you deserved to read through every detail first, before he finds out the full extent of Sue's crimes against you and your son. He's already begun freezing all of Sue's corporate access accounts and cutting off her monthly expense stipends after discovering the fake paternity test alone. Once he sees all this, there's no telling how severe the fallout will be for her. I nodded, thanking him quietly for tracking down the complete archive of hidden proof, then watched as he stood and left the dorm without lingering any longer. Once the door shut behind him, I picked up the folder again and reread the forged hospital attorney letter line by line. That single document had locked every medical facility's doors to my critically ill baby, cutting off every chance we'd had at life-saving surgery, Sue's unforgivable core crime, the root of all my suffering over the past 3 years. That night I sat alone on the dorm bunk for hours, sorting through the full stack of archived evidence old Chen had delivered. My phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming calls from Pei's private number, each ring growing more persistent than the last, yet I muted the device and set it face down on the table without answering a single one. I needed time to untangle 3 years' worth of warped resentment and reevaluate every dynamic between Pei, Sue, and myself now that the full, unaltered truth was laid bare on paper. Just as I finished tucking all the printed records safely into a locked waterproof storage bag under my bed, Luda texted me a short urgent alert from the camp front desk. Pei's black luxury SUV had just pulled into the mountain parking lot, and he was already walking toward the staff dormitory corridor alone, no assistants or security guards accompanying him up the ice road. I glanced out the frost-fogged dorm window at the snow-covered trail leading to the parking area, spotting his tall figure cutting through the blowing snow, head bowed against the bitter glacial wind, walking straight toward my room's door. The moment of full reckoning between us was finally unavoidable. Every secret Sue spent 3 years burying about to surface entirely in our face-to-face conversation.